I think it's very prominent and timely. Truthfully, there's a couple of other adeno-associated virus gene therapies on the market today. Hemgenix, as you mentioned, is the most recent one, approved in December for hemophilia B. There's a couple others that have been approved. Zolgensma, if you remember a few years back, for spinal muscular atrophy, is also an RAAV gene therapy. It was a pretty landmark approval back in 2019 for that small population of pediatrics. Before that, a couple years prior was Luxturna. You remember that in 2017 was the first one approved by the FDA, and that one is used to treat a specific form of retinal dystrophy. Really, all of these were pretty revolutionary in their approvals and what their outcomes show. They really change lives for these patients in their populations that they are intended to treat. But really, what we have so far is really just the tip of the iceberg. The pipeline is chock full of these gene therapies. There's several different types of gene therapies. There's over 2,500 in the pipeline of all of them. Over 50 of them is this specific recombinant adeno-associated type. And one of the advantages of that type is there's a large diversity of cell types it can be used to modify. Additionally, the gene expression from these therapies has a pretty good longevity. It can be used throughout the body, the circulatory system with hemophilia, ocular diseases that we've already seen, musculoskeletal systems, and even the central nervous system. So there's really a broad spectrum that these therapies can target and treat, which is one of the advantages they have.
It is the price. That's one piece. And that, when I first thought about this topic, that's what came to mind is, wow, nobody can afford this. But in all honesty, when you dive a little bit more deeply into the potential inequities, there are many factors that raise concerns with regard to gene therapies and equitable access. So it involves health disparities surrounding the research, as well as the prevalence and severity of disease in minority populations, as well as treatment and outcomes, particularly as it relates to select genetically inherited and often rare diseases. So inequitable access to care is a reality even for certain communities, lower income patients. There's so many factors that kind of come into this besides just being able to afford the medication. And it's definitely the foundation of prior authorization, utilization review, definitely the foundation there. And then you can kind of build upon that. So one of the programs that we've actually talked about in the past is our high-cost therapy management program. I actually presented at the 2022 AMCP Nexus, different colleagues of ours, where we have a specialty matched physician review any request that comes in for these high and ultra high cost drugs to kind of set a price point and decide does it make sense to have this in-depth review for that particular drug. So kind of decide on the drug list. And then again, we have that specialty matched physician looking at it regardless of whether it's going to be approved or denied or looking for more information. So that's kind of like building upon that. But then there's also other options that a health plan would possibly take part in, not necessarily administered by Magellan, but includes alternative payment models. And I think this is something that's really being explored right now, especially with thinking about the pipeline, as Andy mentioned, that, we've got a lot of drugs coming out that will be, the RAAV products. But ultra rare, yes, you have to think about it. You could be your 1 in a million patient, but there are going to be more common rare diseases like hemophilia that we're going to need to treat. And we have to start thinking about those alternative payment models. So like outcomes or milestone-based agreements, mortgage-like payments, subscriptions, risk pools, orphan reinsurer that can help to pay for this. But then also you kind of have to think about the fact that you need to follow patients too, if you've got something like a value-based agreement. In general, you want to follow these patients because we're going to want to know from a real-world perspective, does it make sense to be investing in these medications? Sure, they looked good during the trials, and yes, after 6 years, this therapy seemed to work as we intended it to work. But we're talking about rare diseases that start in infants and young children. Okay, in 6 years, they're still going to have to be concerned about the rest of their lives. So you really need to kind of think about that from that perspective, but also in the population that we're concerned with that may be underserved or more difficult with regard to their financial status and whatnot. We need to be concerned about following them because it may not necessarily be easy for them to get to these centers for monitoring the outcomes that we're looking at. So it's really important to kind of, as a health system, take stock of how we can better follow our patients. And maybe we do think about, it picks up and moves if they go from one insurance to another, or if they move from commercial to Medicaid or even into Medicare, and just kind of being able to follow that patient. And I'm not sure we have those answers right now.
There's a lot of variables at play, especially with these high cost products, because payers don't want to be fully responsible. They want to share that risk with whether it be, other payers as patients move around, possibly the pharmaceutical company that developed the product. It's difficult, for everyone involved because of these high price tags, in addition to what Michelle talked about. And so there's all these variables at play, from the member getting the product, being followed, being able to make it to those different, follow-up appointments, and being able to get the data needed for that follow-up research, in addition to just understanding the financials, on the other side of the fence with the payer part. So there's a lot of variables at play here. There's some options that have been discussed, that are explored, that are being tested and tried out, but we don't have, a best solution really today, because there's it's a high dollar, and people don't want to say, I'll take the risk on that. It's not something people are jumping at doing, but they understand it has to happen. And so I think we're going to see more and more strategies and options come out, but until we're being forced to do that with more and more of these approvals, they're going to be slow rolling initially.